Okay, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to London HR Connection. For those of you who haven't met yet, my name is Craig McCoy. I'm the chairman of London HR Connection. It's nice to see so many people here today, both members and guests, so welcome. Thank you once again to our hosts, Bird and Bird, for providing the venue and our refreshments. It's my great pleasure today to introduce two speakers. The first speaker is on my right, Ross Bartlett from Ogilvy. Ross is the head of learning development for Ogilvy in the advertising sector. I've had some experience with myself at Aegis Media, recognising the particular challenges for HR people that advertising can present. So Alex is going to be talking about managing conflicts in the sector, together with Alex Ephidiamides from Consensio, who has been working very closely with Ross as well. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't believe the hours I put into helping you become the monster you've become.
I was doing my job.
It was my account!
Your account? You have no idea what you're doing. In fact, as far as I can tell, our need for you disappeared the day after you fired us.
Mr. Campbell, that'll be enough of that. Mr. Campbell, you and I are going to address that insult.
Are you kidding me?
No, you're a grimy little pimp. As soon as I raise my hands, I warn you, it shall be too late to run.
Fine. You want to take your teeth out, or you want me to knock them out?
I know cooler heads should prevail, but am I the only one who wants to see this?
Let's go.
This is medieval.
So, just a regular Tuesday morning for Ogilvy and Mather, perhaps. So thank you. It's quite a auspicious kind of crowd, isn't it? Alex and I have been working together in partnership at Ogilvy for about 2.5 years now. And Alex approached me, I think, back in the spring, perhaps, and said there was an opportunity to speak at one of these forums later in the year. So of course, in that impulsiveness, you go, yeah, that'd be great. And then about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we start thinking, actually, it's 3 or 4 weeks ago, we've got to pull something together. So we've got a bit of an interactive session for the next 30 or 40 minutes. What we thought we'd start with is a little bit of a story, because who doesn't like a story? And this takes us back about 3 years to when, more or less to the day actually, I joined Ogilvy. Now my background pre-Ogilvy is very much learning and development. I spent probably the bulk of my career with the Royal Mail Group and Thomson Reuters, and I've done a few interim roles with the likes of British Gas and a couple of small start-up businesses. So I'm an L&D sort of practitioner, coming from a sort of psychology background, so that's my sort of passion. So I'm really interested in behavioural psychology. But I met Julia Ingle, who's our head of talent for the UK and EMEA, about 3 years ago, and there was an opportunity at Ogilvy to come on board and sort of sort out the L&D infrastructure. Until that time, no one had done that role specifically. It all had been done by someone else from within the business. So I was the first sort of L&D specialist that they brought on board. So my way of working out the back of Thomson Reuters was very much a consultative partnership sort of practice. So what I found was that the L&D function was a bit transactional, It was very much, here's a list of training. Managers had an understanding that they could send people off on this training and everything would be fixed. Something some of you might be familiar with. A bit sticky plaster, and we'll come back to that sort of theme a little bit later. So what I did, I sat down with the heads of talent management back in probably sort of June 2013 or something, and said, right, what is it that the business needs to happen in terms of evolution? How do we meet our challenges over the next 2 or 3 years? And there was one area that stuck out quite readily, which was the management capability. So it's an easy thing to say, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the likes of the ILM and the CMI. And I've worked with both of those institutions quite a lot. And I particularly work more recently with the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute. And they will cite every year that statistically, somewhere in the region of over 60% of managers in the workplace have never had any formal management training. People get promoted, often out of sorts, into a management role, and they don't really know how to manage people, not all of them, but most of them, which creates problems. So the talent management head said to me, we've got 3 really interesting problems here at Ogilvy. One of them is that, and it's a bit of an irony, but actually this is a nice place full of nice people. Okay, well, that's kind of nice. They've hired me, I must be a nice person working in this nice place. But actually one of the consequences of a place which is full of nice people is that we're not very tough. Okay, we're very, very risk averse. We have a large contingent of creatives who are quite artistic. Anyone been in a creative sort of role, type of thing? Just be careful where I tread, you know. But they're a little bit more emotional than some of the planners and the strategists, for example. And they don't do performance feedback. They don't do internal sort of criticism, really. It's a little bit softly. So this was an interesting challenge. It wasn't that we're trying to build people up to have these kind of difficult conversations. It was actually we're trying to sort of actually bring people down a bit in order to have these tough conversations. So a nice place full of nice people. Kind of a nice problem to have, really. A consequence of nice people was that we onboard people and everyone goes through a probation period of 3 months. Okay? One of the consequences of nice people was that people were quite often going through the probation period and becoming permanent employees, and then the managers were realising and deciding that they weren't fit for purpose. You, as HR practitioners, you know that creates a little bit more complications than trying to deal with people performance during the probation period. And this was quite rife, and this was happening a lot. So we were creating a lot of extra work for the talent management function because the probation periods weren't being done right. And you know, to quote anonymously, people would come to me and say, actually, will people suddenly get to the end of their 3-month probation, and then there's this big avalanche of sort of feedback, and actually, well, what you were doing in week 2, 3, and 4 wasn't right. And you go, well, you're telling me this now, and I've not had a chance to do anything about it. So nice people and poor management of probation periods, 2 sort of challenges. And the third challenge is really, perhaps kind of summarises both those things, was around performance reviews. It was pretty void, and I think it was probably fair to say the number of people as a percentage who had performance reviews was probably 5% of people. So there was pretty much, we're about 1,500 strong, so we've got somewhere in the region of 1,400 plus people who haven't had an annual appraisal or performance review at any time in their sort of knowing career at Ogilvy. Okay, so how does that guide you in terms of people's performance? Well, of course, it doesn't give you much to work on. So they were 3 interesting sort of challenges. So we said to the talent management group, okay, well, how can we start to try and tackle this? So we'll build some management development programs as a start. So it's something I've done in previous organisations and I've become modestly skilled at. So we sat down and worked out all the key skills that these managers needed. So we ended up with a program called Stretch, and I'll just give you a quick idea of what this looks like. It's a Stretch program, and our internal brand for development is Grow You. So everything's branded as Grow You. So there's this learning pathway that people go through, which I think ended up to about 11 modules of development, which spanned about 6 months. And one of the components in that was conflict management, how to deal with conflict. So again, as most of you have experienced, you typically go out to various suppliers and see, right, we need to deal with this problem that's not unique, but it's fairly bespoke because we're nice people having these difficult conversations. So we came across Alex and Consensio roughly, I don't know, it was about 2 years ago perhaps. And there were two things that I particularly liked about their proposition in contrast to a couple of other providers. One was that they had a lot of media experience. One of the facilitators, Carolyn, if I get that name right, is very much ex-ITV, I think, a lot particularly, but a lot of media background, so that fitted quite nicely with our culture. And the other thing that I'm really passionate about as a learning professional is experiential learning. And pretty much about 50% of the programme is all about experience and trying and testing and giving people the opportunity to walk away having tried and tested something. So the Consensio were engaged as part of this learning programme. We took 14 people on 2 programmes in that first year, so we had 28 people run through, and we get to more or less year 2.5 now. We've run 6 of those programmes over the last 2.5 years. What of course we realise is that this is kind of a middle tier management target group that we're looking at. What we realise of course is that you can't just deal with one layer of behavioural change, you have to implement more layers. So we built another development programme called Accelerate, which is our first time managers programme. Runs over a shorter time frame, but also has Consensio and conflict management in it. And then we developed a senior management program called PACE, which runs slightly more longer. They get to stay in nice hotels rather than the room downstairs with the cheap coffee. And again, we use experiential role play actors in that. So what we started to do was embed conflict management training in our 3 fundamental programs. So collectively across all of those programs, we've probably targeted and trained about 200 people over a sort of 2-year period. Conflict management, and we've got another brand internally called Courageous Conversations, which is a slight spin-off, is now on the sort of main agenda of the stuff we do, as well as being in these management programs. So there's a question of, well, so what? Okay, we did all this training. We've touched about sort of 200 of our sort of core leaders and managers. What's the impact then? Well, there's 2 really, really significant notable impacts. Neither of them are an immediately easy to put sort of financial attributes to. But from a cultural change, the talent management group have absolutely, without fail, had less managers coming to them on a day-to-day sort of basis asking about how do I deal with this situation. A consequence of that, clearly and absolutely evidently, is that the heads of talent management have had more time to be more strategic. And it's very different, it's another story to tell, but the evolution and the transformational nature of the talent management function now, compared to what it was a couple of years ago when it was very transactional, is absolutely fantastic. The 2 or 3 people that are still consistent in that role, and there's 4 people, one's changed, is absolutely been fantastic. So the whole infrastructure is enabled a much more business partnering sort of relationship. And we've had probably 100% more initiatives going out this year than we had in the last couple of years. So that's been really enterprising. And of course, something that we will pin down with some numeric data by the end of the year is the probation period topic. That 2 or 3 years ago, we had a lot of people going through probation, then potentially failing, becoming full-time employees, and then trying to get them out of the business, and that has a clear cost on it. Pretty much at the same time, we developed an internal talent acquisition community as well, and they started trying to recruit direct. So we've seen, they put some figures out at the end of last year, which almost nudged to about £1 million worth of savings, which was very tangible in terms of not going through agencies and recruiting people directly. So we've seen we're starting to put some really good heavy numbers on these things. I guess to some extent that's the story. How are we doing for time?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Are there any questions on just that sort of snapshot before we move on to the next bit?
Just about the internal recruitment.
Yes.
How does that work? Do you mean just identifying people within the business that should be in a different role? Or people using people in the business to bring people in?
It's a bit of both, I suppose. I mean, what we've, again, not unique to our sector, but we historically used a lot of agencies, and you're paying 15, 20%, 25% commission or so. So we've reduced the amount of agents we've been using by using the internal network. Yeah? Yeah.
How easy was it to get line leadership by them?
Well, it's a good question, and Alex mentioned this, in terms of what's the challenges from the business in terms of buying. I was very fortunate at Ogilvy because they hadn't really had anything before. So this was all kind of a luxury item. So in my situation, it was very straightforward. There's a sort of a secondary challenge to that, which I might add, which is actually attendance. So attendance is a challenge. I think probably we're touching about 70% attendance, which is probably acceptable. One of the challenges I push back to the business is, of course, billability, because we've got a large chunk of our business which is kind of 90-95% billability. And one of the things we'll touch on later is that you've got to allow managers time to manage. You can't expect them to be 100% billable and manage, because it just doesn't add up. So the quick answer was I didn't have a lot of pushback because this was all new. A lovely thing that's happened is the pace, particularly, we talk about our paces now. So this has become common language within the business. And stretch and accelerate are all part of our sort of common day-to-day sort of language, which is nice. So can't give you any meat on that one, but it was pretty straightforward for me. Okay, Alex.
Thank you. All right. So I'm Alex Eftimiadis from Consensio, one of the co-directors and founders, along with Anna Shields. And so I'm going to speak just a little bit about how it is that we as an organization decided to branch from being more of a workplace mediation provider to some years ago deciding actually it has to be about more than workplace mediation. Yes, it's important to offer workplace mediation, but actually if you're being called in at that point, it means that things have already gone wrong. So how do we target things more quickly, earlier, and when things are still informal, so that actually you don't need mediators to come in at all? And so based on our experience of working with different clients in the private, public, and third sectors, we realized one of the issues seems to be that managers don't know how to have difficult conversations at work. So what we found with our clients is two different things happening. Either managers didn't know how to have the conversations because they lacked confidence, because they lacked skills, so they avoided them, and things of course festered and grew and then became very serious and very formal, often quite quickly, and that was a huge problem. And HR often said to us, our managers aren't managing. They're relying on HR to take care of all the issues that they should be taking care of. So there was that challenge, and of course a huge negative impact on HR because they were having to deal with issues that the managers should have been dealing with. Or the other extreme, that managers, because again they didn't know how to have these conversations, were coming in very quickly in a very aggressive and punitive manner. So you had the two extremes, and so we very quickly realized actually one of the keys here is building capacity so that managers are able to manage conflicts within their teams, conflicts between perhaps themselves and colleagues, so that issues can be resolved in that team quickly and informally. And so we were very, very happy when we had the opportunity to work with Ogilvy and train up over 70 of some of your managers. As you can imagine, very interesting, creative people, very kind of passionate as well about their work. And so we worked with them and hopefully, and I think we did, give them some really concrete skills that are helping him to have those difficult conversations. And I'll talk more about that later. But one of the questions I have for you is, why do you think that conflict management training for managers isn't a strategic priority within organizations? Ogilvy are different. Ogilvy were progressive in that. Most organizations don't see it as a strategic priority.
Nobody wants to admit to the conflict.
Nobody wants to admit to the conflict. That is definitely part of it. It's a taboo. You think that perhaps by admitting to it, you might be ruining your reputation, you might be hanging out your dirty laundry, etc. So that's definitely, it seems to be an admission of failure. Why else?
I think my experience as well, it isn't always picked up. Because
Yes.
a manager, almost by its very nature, conflict, is somebody trying to outmaneuver someone else and they're keeping a secret and they're whining, and it's happening, it's like a sort of boil.
Yes.
It's a bit under the surface.
Absolutely. It's not picked up. And I think that's another really important point. It's not picked up at all often until you're suddenly faced with a grievance and a counter grievance or even an employment tribunal claim. Yeah. And so one of the things that's really important about the training that we deliver is that we help managers to recognize the early warning signs of conflict. Yeah, but thank you. Why else? I saw some other. Wow, lots of hands, great.
Direct costs.
Yes.
You can't put a pound sign on it.
Yeah.
Organisations would tend to not focus on it.
Yeah, so direct costs. So actually, I think, and that's a really interesting issue because I think that actually it is quite easy to quantify the cost of conflict if we really thought about things like how long does it take to go through a grievance process? How many man and women hours are you using for that? How much time also is it costing an organization when people go off on sickness leave due to work-related stress? A lot of our clients have people off for weeks, sometimes months, or even years. And of course, that has a direct cost. But I think that we need to do more work in collecting that information and putting it in a kind of quantifiable a number, and then people might be more aware of it. But yeah, I agree with you. What else? I saw more hands. Yes.
Actually, there's a perception that conflict is always something negative.
Yes.
Actually, the way I look at it is that sometimes conflict can be totally positive because it identifies weaknesses within the organization, recognizes the pace of change, and you can actually use that if you feed it back to senior management.
Yes.
The fact you can sort it out and then use that to address those issues.
Yeah. And as practitioners, and my background is in organizational psychology with a specialization in conflict management, that is a very important difference, constructive conflict, which is what you're talking about, versus destructive conflict. And the only type of conflict most people see is destructive conflict. And I'll come back to that in a second because that's something I want to focus on a little bit later. Thank you. Two more people back here. Yes, maybe you first.
I think it's just a common problem that people are focusing on the short term.
Yes.
So they're focusing on sales, revenue, profit, and then lose sight of the long-term value.
Yes. And sometimes the investment in a difficult conversation, for example, the time investment, doesn't seem as important as getting the things done on your list or having that meeting or selling that product or billing those hours. Absolutely. Of course, in the long term, if you'd had that conversation earlier, you would have saved much more time. And that's something we need to become more conscious of. Thank you. And one more.
Well, I guess from my perspective, not very many organizations have an active feedback culture.
Yes.
So if you're not continuously in a conversation with your employees about how they're doing, good and bad things, then suddenly when you have a conflict, that makes it emotionally and psychologically so much bigger. And therefore, obviously, I don't want to enter the conversation at a particular point.
Definitely. Great. So as you can see, many challenges to overcome, but hopefully after today's presentation, also a clearer understanding about how essential it is to train your managers to become more aware of conflict, constructive conflict as well as destructive, and to actually have those difficult conversations at work. So one of the things I would like you to do is just, if you have a piece of paper, that's great, and a pen, and if not, just in your head, write down the first 3 words that come to mind when you think of the word conflict. Don't think about it too much, just write them down. Uncensored, they can be anything. Just 3 words. And then, Ross, should I write them down on the flip chart? Do you want to do it? Should I do it?
Yeah. Well, I'll do it.
You'll
You
do
can
it, great.
concentrate on it.
Yes, thank you. So, just 3 words, anything at all. No filtering, just get them down. And now I'm going to ask you to call out some of those words.
Slowly.
So, slowly. Yes, Ross, write slowly. So that we can start capturing them. What's the first word?
Disagree.
Disagree. What else?
Respect.
Respect.
Difference.
Difference. Fights.
Solutions.
1 second.
Is that fights?
Fights, yep. And then solutions.
Challenge.
Challenge.
Opportunity. Silence.
Opportunity. Silence. Yeah. 1 second. Very quick, right, Ross? Silence, great. More.
Effort.
Effort.
So anger.
Anger. What else?
Difficult.
Difficult. Difficult. And then
Fear.
uncomfortable. Yeah. And difficult. Thank you. 3 more.
Judgmental.
Judgmental.
Vital.
Vital. Yeah. Judgmental, vital. 1 more.
Wrong.
Critical.
Wrong.
And critical and wrong. So I can tell some of you have already done some good training, because actually most of the time on a training course, when we ask people, can you come up with this list, we get things like war, bloodshed, grievance, I don't know, you name it, and we get it on the list. And very few of the more constructive conflict words, so I'm impressed.
I think we might have primed them slightly.
I know we did. Actually, I think you primed
Yeah.
slightly, but that's good. That's good. So, and I know some of you were trained because I recognize your faces. So if we have a look at the list, there are still obviously the negative words that we would expect. What are some of what differentiates the words on the list? You can kind of put them into 2 different, quite distinct lists. So lots of emotional words, definitely. And why is that?
Because it's your base response to any kind of conflict.
Absolutely.
It's an emotional response.
Very emotional response. And also, you know, if we didn't care about it, if it didn't in some way touch us emotionally, there would be no conflict. The reason there's conflict is because it's affected us emotionally, right? And that's why in our work we see so often that it has such a negative emotional impact on people, psychological impact. Yeah, so people say to us, I can't sleep at night. I'm not eating. I can't focus on my work. I'm teary. I'm on medication because I'm anxious all the time or depressed all the time. So we mustn't underestimate the psychological impact of unresolved conflict. It's huge. And that's why people often end up going on sickness leave due to work-related stress. So there's a huge emotional response here. And what else can you say about the list you've created?
It seems to be a lot of what's going on right now, but also outcomes.
Yeah.
So present focus and then future focus.
Mm-hmm.
And the future focus seems to be more positive.
Yeah.
And the present focus is generally the negative.
Yeah, yeah. So we have things like opportunity, solution, which is the more positive stuff, but then you have the more negative stuff as well. Absolutely, yeah. So let's together then think about what are the positive things that conflict can bring. And that, if you don't manage conflict, if you don't deal with it in the moment, informally, you lose. So what are some of the positive things?
Because if it's handled properly, then that can lead
definitely. So if managed properly, it can lead to creativity and collaboration. And of course, if you don't manage it, you miss out on those opportunities. Mm-hmm. Yes?
I guess one of the important things, it actually brings it out.
Absolutely.
Otherwise it just stays hidden.
Absolutely.
And things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it brings it out. It can really help to clear the air as well, right? It's out there. Now we know it. It's the elephant in the room. Now we can deal with that elephant. Yes?
Development of the individuals involved. So, you know, if you deal with conflict, that you're supporting that individual becoming better in whatever it is that there's a challenge with in the first place.
Yeah, so developmentally, yeah, you're supporting that individual. And also you can actually strengthen relationships. I don't know, I hope we've all in this room had that opportunity to experience what it's like to have really open and honest discussion with somebody else, where you really talk about, you know, when you said that, this is how I felt, and actually my intention wasn't to come across that way. And you actually find out that a lot of conflict situations are caused by misunderstandings, by people making assumptions about what someone else may have done or said, by misinterpreting behaviors, and also by prejudging. So good. Yes?
So Alex, what you just described is about getting a new perspective on something.
Yeah, exactly. Getting a new perspective on something. And I think that's been, and I know that with Ogilvy managers as well, that was really powerful to suddenly think, oh, actually it isn't so bad to have those conflicts. We can work with those conflicts and make them work for us and strengthen our teams and better the communication that we have with members of our team. And it's that shift in perception and perspective that's really, really powerful. And that's one component of the training course. Yes?
Creates a healthy working environment, so reducing costs through.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it has the potential to create a healthier work environment that of course reduces the costs, as you were saying, of say sickness absence, or also just having to move people. I know some organizations just move the conflict person from team to team without actually ever dealing with the issue. Or you lose good talent. That's another huge cost as well. Two more comments, yes.
I find it actually leads to greater respect, because the whole thing that you're now talking about something and you see the different perspectives, you often actually end up respecting each other more, and as a result of that, you can then do more together, and it also makes it difficult for you to then badmouth the other person later on, because you've had that dialogue, and it's just psychologically harder then to go back.
Definitely. And I think that someone else had said respect as well, because Ross, it's on the list, that when we're in conflict with each other, we dehumanize the other person. And so if we never actually talk about the situation, and obviously what often happens is that the relationship, the communication breaks down. And then, of course, it's much easier to dehumanize the other person, because the only type of communication you're having is either via email and copying lots of other people in. Yeah, have you seen that? It sounds like you have. Or through lawyers or through HR. Yeah, so actually it's very easy to dehumanize. And so part of respecting someone is seeing them as a human being. And you do that by talking to them, by having that interaction, that dialogue.
It does make people braver and feel better about themselves for having confronted the challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people do say afterwards, I'm really glad I had that conversation. It's made me stronger or braver, as you said. Yeah. And there was one more, yes.
Calibrating and realigning expectations.
Yeah.
When the expectations aren't met.
Yes.
And that could be because we have differing expectations and we're not aware of the other person's.
That's
so
right.
when we get them out and we recognise that maybe there are some commonalities there, alignment can make a massive difference.
Yeah, definitely good point. Great. So hopefully at least one of the things you can take away from today's session, hopefully you'll take away a few sessions, but it's just the importance as you were saying, of a different perspective, a healthier perspective, a more holistic, I think, perspective of conflict. Great. So, this is just, whoops, sorry, nothing happened. This is just some really interesting recent research that's come out this year from Harvard and Stanford business schools. And they did a meta-analysis of over 200 studies that looked at the relationship between workplace stress and long-term health outcomes. And so the researchers, and this is very good, reliable research, said that health problems associated with job-related anxiety account for more deaths each year than Alzheimer's disease or diabetes. And I think, again, it's something we ignore. What does it mean for an employee to be coming into work each day feeling anxious, feeling that they might be losing their jobs, feeling that they don't have enough time to spend with their families because the demands of the job are too high, etc. So I think we really need to think about how can we make the work environment a healthier place, both psychologically, also physically, so that in the long term people aren't going to have these health consequences. Why do you think that people become so stressed at work? What's happening at work that is making people so stressed?
It's a key part of their lives, but it's also their livelihood.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a key part of their lives. We spend so many hours at work, more than outside of it, but it's also about livelihood, it's about security, it's about needs that we have, and job security, financial security. Yeah. What else? Yes.
Going back to the expectations issue, when the outside world doesn't match the inside world, then tension can be set up, particularly if the individual doesn't feel that they have enough control to be able to change what's going on out there.
Yeah, definitely good. One more comment?
I think there's a big overlap here between, I work in mental health, so where there's a big overlap between engagement and anxiety. If you look at the SCARF model of engagement, and all of those are key drivers for engagement, but they're also key drivers for reducing anxiety.
Yeah, definitely.
And where you have a misalignment of people's values and things like that, misalignment between their values and the values of the organisation.
Yeah, great. And Ross, did you find that because your managers were trained in conflict management skills and in all of the different modules of Stretch, Accelerate, etc., that they seem to be more engaged with the business? That this led to an increase in engagement?
Yeah, and it's important to note that the conflict part was an element of
something bigger.
So there's lots of behavioural stuff in there, lots of stuff from the Steve Peters Chimp Paradox stuff. We've embraced that in the last couple of years. Some of the kind of core skills, actually, how do I do things, to give them the knowledge of, right, this is how you do a review, this is when this has to happen, so some of the infrastructure as well. So, but we do a pulse survey every year, so that those measurements have seen an increase in terms of employee engagement over the last 3 years. 2040, we placed in the best companies for the first time, and that was off the back of the work we did sort of 2012, 2030. We took it a couple of years out because we've got a building move next year and everything, so there's a whole lot of stuff going on that's going to change us, but we'll probably re-enter that sort of for 2060, I think. But
Great. So I will hand over now, or back to Ross, just to talk about some of the lessons Ogilvy learned.
Yeah, I mentioned sticking plasters earlier on, and there was a little bit of response from people in terms of, often managers have this concept that you send people away on training and then that's it. So it's important to realise, of course, that the programmes that we've done are not isolated events. I've very deliberately run them over quite a long period of time, so the learning gets kind of snowballed, if you like, through. And on the first session that they do, where they do quite a lot of what we call authentic leadership, so they do emotional intelligence insight, Myers-Briggs, that kind of psychometric stuff, and then they get a 360, and they make quite a strong action plan out of that, which then they carry through for the 6 months on this program, and that's picked up with every facilitator and then the same facilitator tops and tails the program and sort of finishes them off, if you like, at the end, which is great. But one of the challenges I have with the TMs sometimes is that we sometimes try and solve the problem that we see, and we don't necessarily try and solve the root cause of the problem. So I'll give you another little exercise to do. Now this one's quite good if you can just do it in sort of pairs at least, or threes or something. Again, just want you to think for a moment that, and I just want you to visualise that you're in a big green field. Okay, nice big green field. And in front of you in that big green field, right in front of you, is an Olympic size hurdle, about waist high. Okay, nice and simple, yeah? Everyone got that in their heads? Right, I'll just give you about a minute to jot down how many ways can you think of getting over that hurdle. Okay, just have a quick brainstorm. How can you get over that hurdle?
So because people have to ask questions, okay, so 20 minutes. So I think it's more important.
All right, that'll do just for a little snapshot. Right, just give me a few samples of how we got over the hurdle. Jumping.
Went round it.
Went round it. It's creative. It's good. Head first, bit of a bit of a dive. Yeah, leg up. You push it over. Okay. Go ladder. Okay, great. So it's interesting that people see a problem and we can solve a problem. Yeah? Everyone happy that they could get over the hurdle. Now, same exercise with a slight variation. Okay, you're in the same field, but this time you have a high jump in front of you. Okay, sort of 2 meters, 6 foot high jump. How can you get over the high jump? This is okay. Which one? Crane. Right, what ideas do we have that are different from the first set? Dismantle the high jump. Dismantle the high jump?
Lower the bar.
Lower the bar, human pyramid. Pole vault. Call for help. It's an option.
We're interested to know whether you used the word over purposefully or whether that was just...
Okay. Narrow thinking. This comes from a creative workshop. Anything else? I've had other examples like human cannons, catapults, trebuchets.
We'd take it closely to make us really tall.
Okay, great. Okay, all lovely ideas. But the point of that little tiny exercise is the fact that all of the solutions you came out with for the second high jump were also suitable for the first hurdle. Okay, but we have this thing inattentive blindness in us and limiting belief, so we don't see the big picture sometimes. Which was the point I was trying to make with the sticking plasters, that we try and solve a problem. We solve the hurdle, great, we get over the hurdle, but in fact, if we take a step back and think, potentially, what's the bigger problem here? And then some of those other ideas actually might solve a longer term problem, rather than just solving the immediate thing. That's just one of an example of the sort of things that we do. So it's important to try and think just beyond what you see. Okay, people not dealing with probation periods. Okay, well that's a hurdle, but why? Okay, is it because of nice people? Why? And this has led to something else that we've now built into the programme this year, which we launched again at the end of October. We're now building in unconscious bias training, because our diversity isn't powerful enough to help us shift that trend in cultural shifts within the business. So with nice people, yeah, gender bias, gender balance in the business is good, cultural balance is not too bad, but class, we're terrible. Okay, so we need to embrace that. So it's another initiative that that's now come out, which was probably there 2-3 years ago, but we solved the hurdle and didn't think about that long jump. So just an interesting idea. We know that behavioural change takes time. Most of you have probably had some experience of sort of 2 to 5 year sort of programs, hopefully by now. But I mean, this is just coming really, by the time we get to spring next year, it would have been a 3-year cycle. We've just reworked all the programs. I'm rewriting those during October, November to relaunch again, ready for next year. So we recognise that it's a constant evolution. Things need to keep changing. The deep-rooted point is about the fact that we started with the stretch program, then we embedded that in the junior management program, we put it in the top senior management program, and then took it group-wide. So we're touching as many people as possible to make the influence. And we mentioned this point earlier about we have to allow people time to manage, So that's an ongoing challenge with the business in some areas where their billability is sky high and they haven't been allowed time to manage. Next,
yep.
Just a little bit of reflection. This is just a snapshot that Alex pulled off some of the people that came on the programme. Sorry. So there's a couple of things that really stood out for us with these snippets. On the top one was that people were seeing this as relevant all the way through the organisation. And so the empowerment word was really important for us because we wanted to give people the confidence and the ability, which came through the experiential learning, to actually go and try it. I don't believe personally that you can train something like this just by theory. You have to go and practice it.
And just briefly on that, Ross, so in terms of the experiential learning, what we do is we allow the delegates to observe one of the trainers, who obviously is very experienced in this field, to have a difficult conversation based on the needs of the actual delegate. So is it about performance management? Is it about the person coming late to work all the time? Is it about an attitude problem? Whatever it might be. And then so they observe that and then they get to practice it. So in pairs, in a confidential, safe environment where people feel comfortable as well making mistakes. We always say to them, make the mistakes in the training room because then you won't make them in real life. And then the trainer will also give feedback.
And it's also important to mention that we pre-arm Consensio with scenarios that are very topical.
Absolutely.
So for the last couple of years, our business hasn't done quite as well as it had previously, so there's been a bit of a reduction in terms of bonuses and pay rises. So that's become a difficult conversation that a lot of managers are having to have, if they haven't had to have previously. So again, that goes into the piggy bank of scenarios. Like, this is a real challenge for you. So this is a conversation you're almost inevitably going to have in the next quarter. So have some practice. And that changes as time. That wasn't there 2 years ago, and it is now. Okay, I think we just got. Have we got one more?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
So,
thank you very much for listening to us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you have any other questions, because I think we have another 10 minutes, is that right?
Sure,
for
yeah.
Q&A,
If you want
people
to
need
take
that.
us for questions or so. Otherwise, join us over lunch. But
Yeah.
Some questions.
Or managers nominate themselves, or their managers nominate them? How do you?
The way we've done it is that the heads of TM filter, if you like, all the nominations. So inevitably, as word got round, I get sort of bombarded with people saying, "Can you go on this program and everything?" But I filter it all through the TM because they do all the ops planning and the talent control and everything. So we do things like high performance, high potential performers, stars, rising stars, all that kind of stuff with the 9-box matrix and all that. So they're the filter, and then I just receive what I'm given.
Okay,
to
so
some
people
extent.
can nominate themselves, but they may have to wait a year. There's the TM.
Yeah, I mean, I did a big, quite a strong sort of, I didn't write a policy. Ogilvy's not really a sort of policy place per se, but it's like saying, right, if you go through stretch, I'm not accepting anyone onto pace until at least perhaps a year's worth of practitioner sort of practice of that until we get to that point. So, in fact, this year, coming into year 3, I'm just beginning to see people from 2014 who will probably be on pace in 2016. Because as you've all, I mean, one of the challenges with the millennial crowd these days, as you've probably experienced, is that people just want now. So we've got people who joined last week and say, I want to go on pay. No, it doesn't work like that, So that's just giving people a bit of a reality check in terms of, I'm not accepting someone's going to roll off that and straight onto the next program. I want to see the application of the work.
Sorry, I just wanted to check how is your workforce unionised? So I'm just.
No.
So the tricky thing, I think, with conflict management in a heavily unionised workforce is that often the conversations then get taken out of context and used outside in a different way to the ones that were intended. That presents.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked Raw Mail,
yeah,
Workers Union, and British Gas as well. But that was in a previous, that was 10 years ago, so I didn't have this knowledge now, if you like. So it would have been different. And we were talking earlier about grievances. We have them, but it's pretty marginal. Yeah. But Raw Mail, they were 10 a penny. It's just like, so that it's a very different requirement, which comes back to the nice people thing. Ours was quite an interesting challenge because we were to some extent trying to sort of toughen people up, whereas other organisations you're trying to soften people down a bit. It's quite an interesting conundrum. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to ask just about, do you have many conversations about, in many organisations, there will be brilliant people who are often the source of conflict because their behaviours are different. And I think one of the challenges for us as HR professionals is helping the organisations to draw the line on those sorts of behaviours as to how acceptable they are. So did this sort of work interface with that conversation at all?
It's a good question, and I can think of an individual particularly who fits that perfect scenario, who's very, very senior, and to some extent sort of rules his roost to that degree, because he's very successful and very sort of high up. But Julia, who's the talent sort of director, I know she's had 1 or 2 hard conversations with him, not necessarily off the back of this, but say, look, you have to play ball. This is someone who bought, when there's no pay rises, bought a £2,000 coat stand for his real expenses because it looked the part. Because clients come into us, so we've got characters like that. But it's okay, and it's interesting coming from. I mean, I was at Reuters before, but coming from Royal Mail, which was typically annually very austere. Going into an organisation that has typically been quite, fairly wealthy in terms of money to spend. It's a really interesting, because my take on things is very hard-nosed compared to the existing environment. It's like, we can't just take people away overnight, it sits down a bit of that's what people expect, because it's how it is. So that's been an interesting culture shift for me. So I'm not sure I've really answered your question, but yeah, I mean, we have those scenarios. I know, to some extent, you have to choose the right people at the right time to have those conversations, which is part of the design, isn't it, about the time and the place. So Julia's the right person to have that conversation because she's got the right rank to some extent. But he's I mean, that's an ongoing challenge. That particular individual is a character. Co-stand included. If you ever see something on Twitter, you'll know who it is.
So you've been focusing on managers and how they're going to have their conversations different with people.
Yeah.
What's been the impact on the staff with whom they're having those managers? Have you given any thought to preparing them for a different approach to it?
Well, we've opened this up as a group-wide initiative now as well. So we started with the management program, but now it's what we call an open program. So anyone can come along to it. So we've been running it once every, we do about 6 a year, so it's kind of once every 8 weeks or so. So again, over the last 18 months or so, I've don't know what the headcount number is now, but it's, you know, it's, again, this is the 3 to 5 year sort of cultural change piece. Won't really have a really interesting insight until the back end of next year, I don't think, when we would have probably touched about 2/3 of the organisation with that particular topic. So yeah, it's not, you know, it's a moving thing, isn't it? It's a moving feat. Plus we got about probably an industry average of about 25% attrition. So, you know, as you lose people, you go, it's not very challenging.
Ross, I don't know how many employees Ogilvy has, but I imagine it's rather few of them are male.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
So I'm interested in what your thoughts are about dealing with this in an organisation of some scale.
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I hindsight is sometimes an interesting thing, isn't it? If you've read a book called Switch, anyone read Switch? Okay, it's all about sort of change in industry. It's good read, Times bestseller. They talk about 3 fundamental practices really in terms of trying to create that behavioural change. So, in no particular order, one is about the rider, the elephant, and shaping the path. They're the 3 things. So, one is about getting to the people. So, one is about understanding how the people work. One is about understanding how the emotional context, that's something you alluded to earlier. And then the third area is about shaping the path, making it easy for people to do it. So really, and there's lots of examples in that book of where they've used, they use a phrase in there called something about follow the stars, follow the bright lights or something it's called, which is where you start with a small element, you lead by example, and then people follow. You know, and I think that's probably how you do it in a big organisation. You know, you start with, you find a common friend, if you know, it's like word of mouth will begin to filter out. I mean, it's a longer conversation, but I think that's something to be mindful of. But the book's excellent. There's loads of interesting anecdotes about how that switch. Yeah, I forget the author, but it's on any good online bookshop. Very PC.
Usually it's quite hard to measure behavioural change, right? So I'm assuming as well with your programme it's quite hard to get tangible insight in terms of how does it work. Do you have any measures, any ideas?
Yeah, I mean...
And Ross,
yes.
Sorry, can you just repeat the question because I don't think people hear. It's hard to...
Do we have any measures in terms of measuring behavioural change, to summarise it perhaps? Well, one thing I've implemented in these programmes is, as a practitioner, I'm an EQ2 practitioner, emotional intelligence, so I'm a big fan of that. So what we did with the Accelerate, Stretch and PACE programs is that at the very first part of it, they do the EQ profile. Now one of the measures in EQ is empathy, another measure is assertiveness and so on. So what I'm able to show is that, because EQ is quite a movable psychometric, so if they come on Accelerate, they get their EQ profile, probably loosely about 2.5 years later, they might end up in Stretch and they do their EQ again. So I can measure and see the movement of their behavioural change through that. And again, we do it on PACE. Again, as we said, I'm just beginning to see that happen now because I'm just beginning to measure people who were a couple of years ago. So that gave me some insight into their behavioural changes as a soft measure. The next challenge, of course, the hard measure in terms of, okay, what's the value of all this stuff? And that's another conversation. But I'm big on that as well.
I'm interested in the wider cultural context within the organisation, because you mentioned that the take-up of annual appraisals was very low, 5% or so. So
yeah.
This programme, has that sort of included all components of a sort of an all-embracing relaunch of HR within Ogilvy? Is that how it's perceived by people?
Very much so. You know, we had the stat that I pulled out from 2014 that we got up to 67% with annual appraisals. We're sort of slightly counselled by the IPA, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, and they do a thing called the Gold Awards, so you can enter for a gold standard of practice in L&D. So I submitted to that in 2013 and 2014 and won, and was successful, so we got this nice certificate, which is lovely. Now we failed it last year because one of their key measures is that 100% of people have an annual appraisal, and I couldn't prove that. So this year was our big challenge. So I've spoken to the CEO, Annette King, who's our CEO, And she's on board because she wants the award. So she's gunning for it. So her, Julia, at the heads of office last month, put that out to the CEOs and said, right, you need to support Ross to get this stuff done. So there's a big push now from October, November, December to kind of make that happen. I think it's probably ambitious to get 100%, but I think we can go plus 90. But yeah, this is an all-embracing change, a big cultural change. And Julia's been the sort of initiator of this. So she joined us the year before me. So she's been really transformational. And I love that switch between transactional and transformational. So there's been a big cultural change to what was an organisation that was quite loose, and a bit, very unbureaucratic, which is a good thing, but then it comes with consequences. So we brought, the word that I brought with me all the time was rigour. There was no control, there was no process. People just, there was the budget for L&D in 2012 was probably something in the region of 500,000, 600,000 or something, but with no control at all. People just spending money, doing stuff, which is kind of quite nice because it's quite libertarian. But if you look at it from a practitioner's point of view, you think, Christ, where's it going? So all that's kind of to some extent come up under some control. And we've got to a nice tipping point now because I've proposed for next year that we put 25% of the budget back to the people and let them choose what they want to do. So we're empowering people to decide what they want to do because we've got to that sort of stabilising point of actually, this is about engaging with people. They have to write a little business case, but there's a pot of money. If you've got a good thing, something you want to do that's got value to you and the business, and then do a clawback with that. So if they leave within a year of having done whatever it is, 100% of it comes back, and that's just a simple one-off thing. But yeah, it's been really transformational the last 2 or 3 years. It's been great. It's been a nice journey.
I think that is great because earlier on I was going to say why people get stressed at work because it's about lack of control, and it's just human instinct. If you don't know what's going to happen next, you just panic, and you've just got this constant little state of panic depending on how you're being treated and everything.
Well, if you've read Dan Pink's work on Drive, Dan Pink's talk about 3 fundamental things which I'm passionate about: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Okay, that's the factors that motivate people on his 2 years worth of research. There's a brilliant TED talk, if you haven't seen it, by Dan Pink. It's about 14 minutes long from 2009 at Oxford. And he talks about, he particularly talks about mastery in that, I think, but he mentions those 3 things. But we're really passionate about autonomy. And I was saying to you earlier, my role is just delicious, to use a creative word, in terms of I get almost 99% autonomy just to try what I want, do it, see if it works. If it works, great. If it doesn't, no worries. So I don't get challenged in that, which is a luxury. But embraced by a creative agency, you want people just to go and try it. But purpose is really important to get people lined up from an engagement point of view. And mastery is fundamentally what I do, about improving people's skills to do things. So. Are you thinking? Yeah. Thank you.
Fascinating talk. Thank you very much to both Ross and Alex. Can we show our appreciation in the only one? And hopefully you'll stay with us for Back to Eat. So I hope you very enjoyed today's session, and just a couple of dates for your diary. We have 2 more events before Christmas. The next event is an evening event on the 11th of November. And that's going to be a debate on the subject of, do HR directors make good non-executive directors? So that should be an interesting panel debate. Yours truly is chairing it. And we've got 3 senior HR directors coming along who are also fulfilling non-exec director roles. So I think that'll be a really kind of stimulating discussion. And then on the 2nd of December, we have Mike Elwood, who's the MD for corporate banking at Santander. He's going to be talking about culture change in the banking sector. I think it's going to be fascinating knowing the challenges that affected the banking sector and financial services in recent times. But he's also been drawing out lessons learned for all of us. So I think that will be really interesting as well on the 2nd of December. So 2 evening events before Christmas, so please do come along. I hope you've enjoyed today. I hope those of you who are here as guests will consider joining. If you want to know more about that, please do collar me or any of my other board directors around over Back to Eat. Thank you very much, and enjoy lunch.